It started with the master key, silver, shimmering, and unmistakably illegal. I saw it glint in the sunlight just before Karen jammed it into my front door like she was entitled to the whole neighborhood. She didn't see me watching from the side yard, pruners in hand, mouth full of sarcasm and garden tomatoes. The lock didn't turn. Not because the key was fake, but because the lock was. The doorknob was a decoy, a meticulously crafted bait I had installed a week earlier, just in case. The real entrance was keyed under the eaves and hidden behind a biometric panel. Overkill? Maybe. But after Karen's last stunt, declaring war on my compost bin because it was visually aggressive, I figured it was time to escalate from passive resistance to proactive paranoia. Karen didn't even pause to question why the key didn't work. She just frowned like the door had personally insulted her and yanked it harder, muttering about standardized HOA access compliance, like that phrase actually meant something outside her delusions. Then she did something unexpected. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. Not 911. Worse. HOA enforcement hotline. I didn't even know we had one until that moment. Apparently, she ran it herself. Of course she did. And by the way she kept glancing up at my ring cam, she knew it was recording. She just thought she was winning. I rounded the corner of the house, took my time wiping tomato juice off my hands, and said in the driest tone I could muster, "Need help breaking into a house you don't own?" Karen jumped like I'd appeared out of smoke. Her expression flickered between flustered and furious, like someone caught peeking into their ex's window. "This key," she barked, "is authorized by the HOA to ensure safety and visual compliance." I blinked slowly. "You're breaking and entering, Karen. The only thing non-compliant here is your grasp on criminal law." She pulled her floral print phone case away from her cheek and squared her shoulders like a cartoon lawyer in a daytime court show. "As chairwoman of the Architectural Standards Committee, I'm well within my rights to inspect suspicious modifications. Your mailbox has LED lights. Your porch is painted a non-approved shade of beige. And don't even get me started on that lawn ornament shaped like a duck." I looked past her to my tasteful, absolutely non-duck-shaped statue of a swan. "Karen, that's a swan. And unless you've somehow been deputized by the county sheriff, you don't have authority to jam master keys into private property." She didn't answer. Instead, she clutched the key tighter and stormed off in the direction of her beige Subaru like she'd just delivered a mic drop. I watched her go, my thoughts already spiraling toward the nuclear option. I hadn't wanted to use it. Not yet. But when someone uses a skeleton key on your house and calls it visual compliance, that's not a misunderstanding. That's a declaration of war. And lucky for me, I had my decoys, my cameras, and a very special friend in code enforcement who owed me a favor. Karen didn't show her face the next day, but her fingerprints were all over it. A notice from the HOA was duct-taped to my door. Yes, duct-taped, citing infractions I didn't even know were in the bylaws. Unauthorized lighting. Swan-shaped obstruction. Defensive landscaping posture. That last one made me laugh so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. I called code enforcement. My friend Angie picked up on the second ring. "Let me guess," she said. "Floral print clipboard, 3 pages of nonsense, and a vendetta against native ground cover? You got it in one." She chuckled and said, "I'll pay a visit." Quietly. Meanwhile, I went full petty. The decoy doorknob? I upgraded it. Added a flashing red light inside, a whirring noise that sounded vaguely like a bomb arming, and a tiny lens disguised as a brass screw head. Karen was going to try it again. I knew it. It was only a matter of when, not if. So I waited. 3 days later, just as the sun was setting and the HOA newsletter hit inboxes with the headline, "Security Tips. Hidden violations on your street," she returned. Same beige Subaru. Same clipboard. Same entitlement in every step. I was watching from my garage with a screwdriver in one hand and my Ring app in the other. She glanced around, checked for witnesses, and reached into her handbag like she was pulling out a wand. The master key. Right on cue. She jammed it into the lock again. The light blinked red. A faint clicking sound started. Karen froze. Her eyes darted to the flashing LED, then to the camera lens that was now very clearly tracking her movement. And then, bless her HOA brainwashed heart, she screamed. Not a little gasp. A full-blown, startled banshee shriek that echoed across the cul-de-sac. Porch lights flicked on. Dogs barked. One neighbor came out in pajamas with a rake. Karen spun around, flailing her arms like she was escaping a haunted house, and sprinted for her car. The clipboard smacked the pavement mid-run and exploded into 1,000 pages of color-coded tyranny. I waited until she was safely peeling off down the street before walking up, picking up the key where she dropped it, and slipping it into a plastic evidence bag. Just in case. Later that night, Angie sent me a text. Inspected her property. Found 6 violations. Unpermitted pergola, tinted solar lights, and, get this, an unregistered koi pond. Want pics? I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Send me the one with the pond, I wrote back. I'll print it for my swan. But even as I relished the moment, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wouldn't stop at a single failed break-in. That woman didn't back down when her HOA presidency was voted out by a 2-to-1 margin. She simply changed the bylaws so that losing an election triggered a review committee she just so happened to chair. If anything, the humiliation of the flashing lock would only double her resolve. I checked the footage one more time before bed. I zoomed in on Karen's face right as the light blinked red. Her eyes wide, her jaw slack, the exact second when smugness turned to panic. It was art. Pure, HOA-shattering art. But under that momentary fear, I saw something else. Not regret. Not caution. Just a flicker of rage. This wasn't a setback. It was a motivator. She was planning something. I could feel it. And for the first time, I started planning something too. Not another prank. Not a camera upgrade or a lawn sculpture protest. Something permanent. The next morning, Karen's koi pond was the talk of the neighborhood, which was poetic considering she once tried to fine my neighbor Mr. Ridgely for owning a birdbath she claimed was too reflective. But this wasn't about hypocrisy anymore. This was a game of psychological chicken, and Karen didn't even realize she was already halfway into oncoming traffic. I woke up early, partly to enjoy the fallout and partly because I was too curious to sleep. When I stepped outside, there were already 2 HOA board members arguing at the base of Karen's driveway while she paced on her porch in a white bathrobe and Crocs, flailing her arms like an inflatable tube man during a clearance sale. "Unauthorized wildlife is a health hazard," she yelled, pointing at what I presumed were the koi, probably terrified and huddled under a plastic fountain shaped like Poseidon. "We don't even know if those fish are American." I choked on my coffee. I didn't even know what that meant. She wasn't helping her cause, either. The more she ranted, the more her voice carried across the cul-de-sac, and the more blinds quietly parted in neighboring homes. Her voice hit that pitch only small dogs and car alarms can hear. I nodded politely to one of the HOA members, a newer guy named Omar, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He caught my eye, then glanced at Karen, then back to me, and gave the tiniest shrug of solidarity. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy demanding that the HOA fine itself for the trauma she claimed to have suffered at the hands of a booby-trapped front porch. She didn't know yet that I'd handed over the ring footage to the local neighborhood association as proof of trespass, or that Angie had quietly submitted a formal code enforcement report with her own name on it. That would come later. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I checked the camera. Karen. Of course. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man with a buzz cut, mirrored sunglasses, and the kind of rigid posture that screamed former security, or at least someone who took his HOA badge way too seriously. His laminated ID badge read, Private Compliance Officer, which sounded like something she printed in her basement using a Cricut machine. He held a clipboard, a measuring wheel, and a body cam strapped to his chest. I opened the door halfway, just enough to keep it obvious I wasn't inviting them in. Karen didn't waste time. This is Officer Dunst. He's here to perform a compliance review based on escalating concerns over your property. I blinked. He's not a cop, Karen. Private security has jurisdiction in HOA-enforced zones, she sniffed. Dunst cleared his throat, clearly trying to puff himself up, but it came off more like a guy auditioning for a background role in a procedural drama. This is a formal property inspection. I will be documenting all non-compliance, both aesthetic and structural. I leaned against the doorframe. And who authorized this inspection? Karen smirked. I did. Under Emergency Clause 14b. That clause was repealed 2 years ago, I replied calmly. And you don't have executive authority anymore. You're just the chair of one subcommittee. You're not the HOA president. Her face twitched. She hated when I was right more than she hated the color teal, and I once saw her file a complaint against a child's bicycle for having teal streamers. But Dunst stepped forward anyway and muttered, "Refusal to cooperate will be noted." He raised his phone like he was filming an episode of Cops, Suburb Edition. That's when I made a choice. I stepped aside and said, "Be my guest. But understand that everything you do is being recorded on 7 different cameras, and that you're now trespassing on private property under false authority." He hesitated, then walked in. Karen followed a few paces behind him, clutching a stack of notes. Dunst started pacing out the length of my flower beds, scribbling something on a clipboard and muttering about non-conforming vegetation clusters. Karen pointed at the porch lights. Unauthorized bulbs. These emit a blue hue at night, which violates our natural tone guideline. I raised an eyebrow. You mean the ones I installed to match the official HOA colors from the handbook? Page 17, subsection 4. She flinched like I'd slapped her with legal code. She hadn't expected me to read the bylaws. Most people didn't. I had them memorized. Then Dunst paused by the garage. "This shed extension," he said, tapping the corner of the lean-to I built last year, "is suspiciously within setback distance." "It's 3 feet over the line," I replied. "Variance approved, filed, and stamped by the county inspector." "Want to see the documentation?" He said nothing. Karen reached into her tote bag, yanked out her folder like it was a holy relic, and started flipping through color-coded tabs. That variance was contingent on visual conformity. "This paint shade," she pointed, "is not HOA-approved beige. It's sandstone whisper. We only allow whispering beige." I smiled tightly. "That's not true. Section 3.2.6 allows any tone within 10% visual range of whispering beige. Sandstone whisper is 9.2%, per manufacturer specs." Dunst looked uncertain. Karen looked like a volcano trying to hold in a sneeze. "We'll revisit this," she hissed. "Oh, I'm sure you will," I said sweetly. "I hope you packed a lunch." It took them 45 minutes to go through every square inch of my property, mumbling, measuring, and attempting to justify fines that didn't exist. I made a point of staying calm, never once raising my voice or engaging in their invented drama. The more polite I was, the more desperate Karen became. When they finally left, she gave me a warning glare that would have been more intimidating if her clip-on name badge wasn't upside down. Dunst looked like a man who regretted every life choice that led him to that sidewalk. By nightfall, she'd emailed the entire neighborhood. A full PDF titled Community Crisis: Rogue Modifications and Non-Compliance in Sector B. She didn't mention me by name, but the included photos made it pretty obvious whose property she meant. She even outlined a motion to strip certain residents, i.e. me, of voting privileges based on chronic obstruction and open hostility toward community standards. I read it twice. Then I laughed so hard I had to set down my wine. That night, I set up my trap for Phase 2. I adjusted my exterior lighting to a flickering red setting, Not enough to violate any rules, but just enough to mimic an alarm. Then I positioned a small sign next to the doorbell. This property is monitored by active surveillance, audio triangulation, and decoy entry systems. Every word was technically true, though extremely exaggerated. Karen wouldn't be able to resist it. And I was right. The next morning, just after 6 a.m., my motion alert went off. Karen again. Same outfit. Same key. Except this time, she didn't approach with confidence. She tiptoed like a child approaching a haunted doll. She lifted the master key, hesitated, then yanked her hand back when the red light blinked on. She circled around the porch, craned her neck toward the gutter where she thought the rail lock might be, and whispered something into her phone. I watched it all from the kitchen, sipping coffee and timing every move. The paranoia was starting to set in. That's when I got the email. Subject: HOA emergency meeting, immediate attendance required. Attached: agenda motion to declare temporary executive authority. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 8 p.m. sharp, hosted in the community clubhouse, a beige brick building that looked like a DMV married a dentist's office. I showed up 5 minutes early, dressed in my best casual compliance gear. Clean-cut, collared shirt, folder in hand, and a neutral expression that said I was here to cooperate but fully armed with facts. Karen, on the other hand, arrived in full battle regalia. Her outfit was a loud floral pantsuit that matched absolutely nothing in nature, her hair teased into a shape that made her look like she was auditioning for a reboot of Dynasty. She held a binder thicker than the HOA handbook itself, and a venti coffee cup that may or may not have contained espresso or vengeance. The room was already tense. About 20 residents had shown up, some curious, some concerned, a few clearly bribed with baked goods. The current HOA president, a quiet retired engineer named Greg, sat at the front of the room next to 2 board members who looked like they regretted every moment since joining. Karen walked up, exchanged a few whispered words with Greg, then turned to face the crowd. Her face flickered between benevolent queen and courtroom prosecutor. I sat near the back, close enough to hear but far enough to stay out of arm's reach. I had plans. She called the meeting to order like she was presiding over a tribunal. Tonight, we are gathered to address a growing crisis in Sector B, she began, projecting like a stage actress in a high school auditorium. A resident has repeatedly and willfully violated community standards, installed deceptive security systems, and weaponized legal technicalities against this board's authority. No one clapped. No one booed either. Most people just looked confused or mildly entertained. I saw Omar, the new board member, raise an eyebrow in my direction. He wasn't subtle. Karen flipped open her binder, pulled out a sheaf of papers, and waved them dramatically. These are documented violations gathered over the last month. Lighting non-compliance, unauthorized paint, modified egress structures, illegal surveillance signage, and the presence of a false entry system, a decoy door designed to intimidate and confuse community compliance officers. I stood up, calmly. Point of order, I said. None of those are actual bylaw violations, and the last one sounds like a riddle. A few chuckles broke out. Karen glared. We'll allow rebuttals during the response phase, she snapped. Greg sighed and looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Now, Karen continued, given the pattern of obstruction, I am moving to invoke Emergency Clause 6.14, Temporary Executive Authority. This clause permits the formation of a compliance oversight committee with enforcement power until the next formal election. She handed out pre-printed ballots as if she hadn't planned this entire ambush down to the minute. We will now vote on forming this committee. Greg blinked. Karen, we've never used Clause 6.14. It was written for actual emergencies, like if someone builds a 2-story shed overnight or turns their house into a nightclub. And yet, she said, when a resident installs mock bomb locks and blinds our ability to maintain visual harmony, what else would you call it? Creative home security? I muttered. She passed the ballots around and smirked at me. I didn't blink. Because I wasn't here to stop her vote. I was here to trigger it. The moment she introduced that motion, she walked into the trap I'd baited for weeks. Every HOA clause has limits. Clause 6.14 sounded like a power play, until you read the fine print. It only granted emergency authority if it passed with a supermajority, 2/3 of attending voting residents. But it also triggered an automatic audit by the advisory board, an external oversight group made up of past presidents, including 2 people Karen had alienated during her color code crackdown last spring. And guess who quietly requested they attend tonight's meeting as observers? Yep, me. Right as Karen began tallying the votes, I stood and handed a printed document to Greg. While we're talking about compliance, I said, here's a full record of HOA funds spent under Karen's committee for the last 3 quarters. It includes purchases made without board approval, such as drone photography of residents' backyards, and custom-printed parking tickets she handed out last month, despite having no legal authority to do so. Karen's face turned a color somewhere between raw shrimp and arterial red. And, I continued, I've submitted a formal motion to censure Karen for misuse of committee resources and harassment of residents. I'm requesting an immediate vote. Now the room came alive. Whispers turned into murmurs. People started flipping through the document Greg was holding. A woman near the front raised her hand and asked, "Wait, she spent HOA money on drones?" Another said, "I thought those fake tickets were a joke. She left one on my teenager's go-kart." Greg cleared his throat. It seems we'll need to address this motion before voting on the committee formation." Karen tried to interrupt. "This is a coordinated smear. He's been manipulating the system from the start." I smiled. "Karen, everything in that document is from public HOA records. I just organized it." "You twisted it," she shouted. "You're a liar." "Okay," I said. "Let's vote." The censure motion passed 22-1. Karen stormed out before the count finished, binder in hand, heels clicking like gunshots across the tile. The remaining residents voted down her executive committee proposal just for good measure. Greg looked stunned. Omar gave me a tiny thumbs up. But I wasn't finished. Because Karen wasn't the kind of person who took a loss quietly. She was going to retaliate. And sure enough, she did. The very next morning, my Ring app pinged. Not motion detection, an alert triggered by a secondary camera I had hidden in the flower bed. Karen had returned. Not to my door this time. To my power meter. She was crouched low, wearing gardening gloves, and holding what looked suspiciously like bolt cutters. I stared at my phone for a solid 3 seconds, disbelieving what I was seeing. Then I activated the speaker. "Morning, Karen," I said brightly. "Planning on pruning the electricity today?" She yelped, dropped the cutters, and took off sprinting like a cartoon burglar. I called the police. Not because I wanted her arrested, not yet, but because I wanted a formal incident report. One more document for the growing file. That afternoon, a patrol officer knocked on her door. I watched from my porch, pretending to trim a bush that didn't need trimming. Karen opened her door with the forced grace of someone preparing for a charity gala, not realizing the world was watching. The officer spoke calmly, handed her the paperwork, and left without much ceremony. She stood on the porch for several minutes, staring down at the papers, face unreadable. Then she went back inside. That night I installed floodlights. Not because I needed them. Because I wanted her to know I could. She'd played her best hand and lost. Now she'd have to decide. Escalate further and risk everything, or back off and lose face. Knowing Karen, I didn't have to wonder which path she'd choose. So I started building the next phase of my trap. And this time, it involved a key that did open something. But not what she thought. 3 days of silence from Karen wasn't a peace offering. It was a countdown. And when I saw her Subaru crawl past my driveway with the windows cracked and a camera lens peeking out the passenger side, I knew exactly what she was doing, documenting. gathering ammunition, planning a strike not with fists, but with paperwork, photos, and whatever half-baked clause she could conjure out of the HOA's dusty archive of control-freak manifestos. I was ready. She hadn't touched the fake doorknob again since the last incident. She hadn't even set foot on my porch. But I knew she couldn't resist the thing I'd now planted in plain view, a small, gleaming padlock on a weathered storage box just under my porch stairs. I had bolted it down with stainless steel screws, painted it to look aged and meaningful, and placed a small plaque above it that read, in delicate serif font, "Private Maintenance Access, Authorized Entry Only." The perfect bait. It looked just official enough to pique Karen's authoritarian instincts, but just mysterious enough to make her imagination run wild. The padlock? Real. The box? Real. What was inside? A single laminated note, sitting on top of a motion-activated voice recorder and a dye pack used for bait bikes, non-permanent but extremely visible. I figured she'd get curious eventually, but I didn't think she'd make her move during a community barbecue. The HOA hosted one every summer. Burgers, lemonade, fake smiles over paper plates. Karen usually floated from group to group like a cruise director with a vendetta, but this time she was more subdued. Distant. Observing. She wasn't even pretending to like the potato salad. I kept my distance, chatting with Greg and Omar by the grill. Across the yard, I caught Karen casting furtive glances toward my house. She'd parked closer than usual, and her tote bag was bulging. When the event started winding down, I made sure to leave first. I walked home, unlocked my front door, then quietly slipped out the back and circled around to my garage, where my laptop was connected to the live camera feed. I had 5 angles on the porch. At 7:18 p.m., the motion alert buzzed. Karen. Hoodie, gloves, tote bag slung tight over her shoulder like she was casing a bank vault. She crouched next to the maintenance box and pulled out a ring of keys. Not the silver master key. This was a new set. Probably copied from some maintenance guy she bribed or bullied. She tried 3 before one clicked. When the box creaked open, she paused, like she expected to find something explosive or incriminating. Instead, she found a tidy little note laminated in plastic, which read, "Curious minds end up colorful." The second she touched the paper, the pressure plate under the bottom panel triggered the dye pack. A quiet pop, followed by a hiss, and suddenly her hands, wrists, and the front of her beige blouse were splashed in neon blue and green like she'd lost a paintball war. She shrieked and stumbled backward, dropping her tote bag and flailing like a cat in a bathtub. The motion detector triggered the audio recorder. My pre-recorded voice calmly echoed from a hidden speaker. "This is private property. Trespassing has been documented and reported. Smile for the cameras." Karen bolted, dye dripping from her fingers, blouse plastered to her chest, her tote bag left behind in a pile of shame and bad decisions. I walked onto the porch 10 seconds later, picked up the bag using barbecue tongs, and placed it on the bench next to the Decoy lock. Inside the bag were her binder of violation reports, a handheld UV flashlight, and, because irony is real, a travel-sized bottle of industrial-strength paint thinner. 10 minutes later, she was back. Not to apologize, of course. To scream. From my driveway, still blotched in green and blue, she waved her arms like she was trying to flag down a helicopter. I stepped outside calmly, phone in hand, filming. "You vandalized me," she shrieked. "You assaulted a board member. This is criminal sabotage." I didn't say a word. I just pointed to the security sign, then to the camera above her head, then tapped my phone and said, "Smile again." She froze. She knew I had footage. She just didn't know what I was going to do with it. That night, I emailed it to the board. No commentary. No demands. Just the video, the timestamps, and a screenshot of the HOA handbook clause prohibiting unauthorized access to community property. I attached an incident report, filed with local police earlier that evening. Trespass. Tampering. Vandalism. Let them decide what to do next. The next day Greg called me. "She's been officially suspended from all committee activities pending review," he said, sounding both exhausted and quietly amused. Omar said she looked like a melted popsicle when she stormed into the boardroom. "I hope someone took pictures," I said. "We're not monsters," Greg replied, "but yeah, someone did. You'd think that would be the end of it. A rational person might have slunk away, taken the L, maybe even moved out of shame. Not Karen. No, Karen doubled down. At 3:14 a.m. that Thursday, my garage camera lit up. It was too dark for color, but the shape was unmistakable. Karen. She was sneaking around my yard with a flashlight, stopping every few feet to scribble notes on a clipboard. She was mapping something. I pulled up the infrared feed and watched her stop near my garden, crouch down, and, unbelievably, plant something in the soil. That's when I realized she wasn't just trying to get me fined. She was trying to frame me. The next morning, I waited until she was gone and checked the spot. Buried under the mulch was a plastic bag containing a suspicious-looking garden light, too bright, illegal color temperature, and designed to violate the exact lighting code she'd previously accused me of breaking. I dug it out, photographed everything, and placed the entire package in a sealed envelope with a typed note. "Found this in my garden, where it wasn't the night before. Assuming this was a gift. Returning to sender." I left it on her porch. No signature. By lunchtime, Karen was spinning out. She sent an HOA-wide email alleging theft, sabotage, surveillance entrapment, and a smear campaign led by subversive forces seeking to unravel the moral fabric of our neighborhood. She CC'd a law firm, a local news station, and, my favorite, the FBI Fraud Tips Division. It was unraveling now. She wasn't just flailing. She was combusting. But I knew she still had one card left. The key. The original silver one. The one that didn't work. At 2 p.m., I received an anonymous tip through my website contact form. I'm a freelance designer, and my contact page is usually where I get spam from people selling crypto training. But this one said, "Check your front door. The master key isn't what it seems." That's all I needed. I dismantled the Decoy doorknob carefully. Inside, I found what I'd planted. The internal recorder, the LED light, and, curiously, a tiny tracking device lodged behind the mechanism. Karen had planted a tracker. Probably thinking I'd install the knob on a real door. Probably hoping she could build a case about property avoidance, like I was secretly moving my entrance to avoid HOA inspections. Instead, she'd outed herself. The final blow came not with a bang, but with an envelope, hand-delivered to Karen's mailbox by a courier who didn't even make eye contact. It was heavy, embossed. No return address. Just her name, stamped in stark black ink on cream cardstock that reeked of authority. I watched the delivery from my upstairs window while sipping tea and listening to Bach. It felt right. Like the closing scene of a thriller where the villain finally gets served while the protagonist calmly waters orchids. Inside the envelope was the thing Karen never expected, an invitation. It was from the County Land Registry Board. Apparently, someone, me, had submitted a public request for clarification regarding property line demarcations in our HOA. Nothing illegal. Just a routine inquiry into easement rights, boundary discrepancies, and, most importantly, access protocols. Buried in the fine print of the HOA's charter, which I'd pored over like a medieval scholar with a grudge, was a clause allowing the county to intervene when disputes over authority crossed into surveillance or trespass. I had packaged every incident, from the fake inspections to the planted garden lights, into a tidy little dossier and submitted it along with the footage of her trying to jam the master key into my fake lock, trespassing at 3 a.m., and, of course, the die pack explosion. The county board took it seriously. After all, it wasn't just HOA drama anymore. It was a matter of private property rights and unlawful access attempts by someone posing as a compliance officer. Karen didn't know she was being investigated. That's the thing about people like her. They're so focused on asserting dominance they never realize when they're already under a microscope. The invitation was phrased formally. You are invited to respond to a pending investigation regarding unauthorized attempts to access private property using a non-government-issued master key. She didn't attend the hearing. Instead, she sent an email, 4 paragraphs of unhinged victim theatrics, alleging that I'd fabricated evidence using AI and that the entire neighborhood had been radicalized by a domestic terrorist with an HOA vendetta. The county's response was swift. A notice that failing to appear would be treated as noncompliance, with consequences ranging from fines to civil penalties. But Karen had already shifted tactics. That same afternoon, a local news van showed up on our street. Channel 8. Karen was outside in full, sympathy Karen mode, sensible cardigan, no makeup, eyes moist like she'd practiced blinking into onions. She was being interviewed on the sidewalk, standing in front of a "Concerned Citizens of Crestview" sign she clearly made that morning. Her angle? That I was running a smear campaign. That I had weaponized surveillance against a peaceful senior citizen acting in the community's best interest. Her voice cracked right on cue. What she didn't realize was that the reporter, Julia Tran, had already spoken to Greg, and Omar, and Angie, and me. They had the footage. They had the binder. They even had Karen's emails, including the one where she accused me of harboring rogue geese trained to attack non-compliant residents. Channel 8 ran the story that night under the segment title, HOA Havoc, When Rules Go Too Far. It wasn't even the top story. But it was enough. By the next day, my inbox was flooded. Neighbors thanking me. Former victims of Karen's reign of terror offering to submit statements. Even Greg called to say the board had voted, unanimously, to ban the use of master keys by anyone not in law enforcement or certified emergency services. The motion passed, and all master keys were to be surrendered within 72 hours. But Karen wasn't done yet. That evening, she marched up to my porch, once again wearing gloves and clutching the silver master key like it was a holy relic. She didn't try to open the fake lock this time. She just dropped the key in an envelope, stuffed it into my mailbox, and walked away like she'd performed a noble gesture. I watched it all unfold through the lens of my front camera. I waited until midnight. Then I retrieved the envelope, opened it, and smiled. The key was there. But so was a handwritten note. This neighborhood used to be peaceful before you arrive. You've turned it into a circus. You'll never be one of us. That last sentence stuck with me. Not because it hurt, God, no. Because it was the final confirmation that this had never been about the rules. Not really. It had been about control. About belonging. About her needing to be queen of a sandbox she no longer owned. So I returned the favor. I printed her note, framed it, and hung it in my entryway right above the Decoy doorknob. 2 days later, the final twist landed like a guillotine. Karen had failed to report her own koi pond, technically an outdoor water feature requiring HOA disclosure and insurance review due to wildlife containment. The oversight was discovered when someone, I'll never admit who, submitted an anonymous tip to the insurance underwriters linked to our HOA policy. The inspection revealed not just the unpermitted pond, but also multiple code violations on her property. Mold in the back shed, unauthorized electrical lines in her tiki patio setup, and a pergola that extended 3 feet over the allowed limit. Her insurance premium spiked. She was fined. And the kicker? The county demanded she build a privacy fence around the pond or remove it entirely. Karen tried to fight it. Then she made the biggest mistake of all. She filed a police report claiming I had repeatedly harassed her with automated traps and surveillance weapons. She even showed them a printed still from my security camera, the one where she's lit up like a human glowstick after opening the die-packed box. The officer who took the report called me to clarify. His tone said everything. He thought she was nuts, but he had to check. I invited him over, showed him the footage, the planted garden light, the tracking device inside the knob. He left 30 minutes later. The next morning, I got an email. No further action needed. Subject was advised to cease contact and trespass warnings were issued. Karen went quiet after that. Completely silent. Her house sat in eerie stillness for days, blinds drawn, koi pond covered with a tarp that flapped like a sad reminder of her defeated empire. Rumor was she'd been asked to step down from the HOA board entirely. She hadn't been voted out, she resigned. According to Omar, her final words at the meeting were, "Let them enjoy their decay." Her for sale sign went up the following week. It was small, discreet. She didn't want the attention. But she also couldn't bear to live on a street where she no longer held the leash. The day she moved out, I left a small box on her porch. Inside was the fake doorknob, LED light still blinking, and a typed note. Turns out the only door you ever had a key to was the wrong one. No signature. No return address. Just poetic closure. Now, the neighborhood's better. Greg's still president, Omar's pushing for more transparency, and the swan statue in my yard wears a tiny sign that reads, "Visual harmony achieved." Sometimes I still catch people slowing down in their cars to look at my house. I wonder if they've heard the stories, the rumors, the HOA that fell apart because one woman couldn't resist a key that opened nothing. But I'm not concerned, because Karen taught me the most valuable lesson of all. If someone insists on trying to open your door,